Hi, now we are going to talk about modern state management with Vue 3. Hi, I'm Vanessa. You can find me online as Vansel. I'm responsible for the front end at Savvy. I'm co-host of two different podcasts, Expect Exception, where we talk about front-end testing, and Working Draft, a German podcast about web development. And roughly a year ago, in September 2020, I can remember as I sat there watching Avenue on the Vue.js conference, finally saying, hey, Vue 3 is out there. And now I want you to go with me on the journey how I installed Vue 3 and used alternative concepts to use Vue 3 completely without Options API and also without Vuex. I do not suggest that you should use Vue 3 without Options API or replace Vuex. I want to tell you that the Composition API is so powerful that we actually can use Vue without both of those tools. And it made sense for me in a state where I had a really small application, which I started with Vue 3 from scratch and did not have to migrate from a Vue 2 application. In the code examples I will show in the next couple of minutes, I will use the setup function, and I prefer to use ref over reactive. But everything I will show now, you of course can use the script setup syntactic sugar instead, and you can choose to use reactive instead of ref if you prefer to. As my components of my very small Vue 3 application roughly a year ago started to grow because I had some more complex problems which needed some more complex solutions. I, and therefore also this talk, were mainly inspired by those three articles: Group Extract Share Pattern, State Management with Composition API, and Should You Use Composition API as a replacement for Vuex. Let's focus on three of the Vue's APIs for now: the Options API, Reactivity API, and Composition API. The Options API, we can think of this object structure that we know from Vue 2 single file applications, single file components, where we have our data, computed, methods, watch, mounted, and many more. And the Reactivity API is not that different of that. We have ref reactive for reactive data, computed, watch effect, on mounted, and many more. But the clue is that I can now import those functions directly from Vue. I don't have to use a Vue single file component or a mixin to use those tools. I can import them in any JavaScript or TypeScript file. And then the Composition API is providing us with a setup function where I can bring all the magic together and use all of those powerful tools of the Reactivity API in my Vue component. So let's have a recap of how to write a component in Vue 2 or in Vue 3 using the options. Here I have a template with a paragraph with greeting and full name. If I scroll down to my script block, I can see here that I have a data function, which is returning an object with greeting and hello. I have properties for first name and last name, and I have a computed property for the full name, which is returning me a first name with the spice and the last name. So this is one component with just one purpose, which is doing its job quite well. Kind of a funny side note is that I initialized this greeting here as a reactive data attribute, although I actually don't ever change this and won't need this observers on it anyway, but I was never sure where to put this constants using the Options API. The problem I now want to focus on is that logical units, if the component is growing and growing, are spread over the whole script block. So what do I mean with this? I've prepared this code sandbox here, and here we can see as well, we have our greeting and full name to say hello to the user. But then we also display the user's items where we loop over and also provide a delete item function to delete something. If I scroll down to the script block, I now want you to focus on the order of how things are happening. I have the data function which is returning an object with the greeting and items. The properties having stuff from the greeting. A computed property with the full name of the greeting. Then a method with the function delete item of the items. So the categories bind to the way that the Vue skeleton, the Vue object here is structured. So everything in data is in data, every computed property is in computed property, every function is in the methods block. So now we have a point where we have now greeting, items, greeting, items. So they are shattered over the whole file. And this is kind of, it grows and grows and grows, looking like this. Of course, it can be a solution to split the component. But let's focus on, it doesn't work anymore, we can't split any further, and we still have this lines of code not really bind together. And what the Composition API is providing us with is the possibility to group logical units together again, so that everything is related to the greeting we can imagine being in this light blue box on the top, and everything related to the items we can imagine to be bind together in this darkish blue, almost black box here. So the Composition API enables developers to encapsulate logical units in one single file or shared with others. What I mean with that, as I learned about the Composition API a year ago, it always was sold to me as this is the go-to thing instead of mixin. Use the Composition API to share functionality. It's really powerful. But then I started with Vue free. I thought, but do I really need to share logic to use the Composition API? Because I really like how it works, the Composition API, and I actually like to use it also without sharing functionality. And this is exactly what we will do now. So I have created some Hello World files on this Vue single file component playground. And the first one is a re-implementation of just the greeting stuff we saw beforehand in Vue free Composition API. So here we have our template with the greeting and full name, and we import computed from Vue. If I scroll down to the properties, I see the first name and the last name, and here below I have the setup function, which is giving me a const greeting with hello and a full name as a computed property. And then I return everything to give it over to my template. What is kind of cool is that it's just JavaScript, right? It feels good to me. Actually, it felt a bit sweat like the first time I saw it. So here we have the const greeting as just a pure const without wrapping it in a data object, not using a created lifecycle hook to initialize constants, just a const. And when we have a full name as computed property. But of course, also here the functionality can grow a bit. We are switching to our Hello World 2 component, where I have also my items, which I also can delete. I loop over them in the template and I have my method to delete them. I import computed and ref now from Vue. And if I now scroll down to the setup block, what we can see is the same implementation for greeting with a greeting and full name, and then a logical unit of the items and a method to delete the items. And as I started with Vue free, all of the time my muscle memory was like, oh yeah, I have to put everything data related in the beginning, and then all of the computed properties, and then all of the methods, and then all of the lifecycle hooks, until I remembered, no, I don't have to use this anymore. I can now bind the logical units. I can display them together. But then of course, my component was growing a bit, and I was like, yeah, how do I actually say that these things belong together? Do I have a comment like start items block, end items block? How do I achieve this? So I started to refactor this component a bit. The same template we saw before, but now on top we have two different functions, the use greeting and the use items, which encapsulate all of the functionality in those functions, where I have everything related here and return the necessary properties to the outside. And if I scroll down to the setup block, I can now see that it's getting a bit more cleaner if it was getting a bit nasty, and I can outsource all of this logic to somewhere else. And here, but I can clearly see, okay, I have the greeting and full name items and delete items coming from those two composables. But now the next step is, hey, it would be super amazing if I can use the use items also somewhere else, because I really need this functionality also at another component, which leads us to Hello World 4, which is also refactoring a bit further. I only import computed now again from Vue and not ref anymore, but now I also import use items from use items. Switching to this file, I can see import ref from Vue on top in a plain JavaScript file, and the same function with the use items we just before is now an exported function in this file, bringing us all of the functionality as a composable in our Vue single file component. If I scroll down to the setup block, I can see here again I have my use greeting and the use item. I want to give you a small hint what I'm doing here. So what you can see here is that I first thought it is super cool to use ECMAScript destructuring to get everything related to the use items directly into the template. This is just one line of code. Looks super cool. But then a problem that occurred to me is that I don't have any IDE support here on this playground. And if I try to look for the delete item, I'm lost. I don't know where it's coming from. And therefore, what I tend to do is really to go the explicit way, to not use magic provided by a language by me, but really saying explicitly, okay, I import those things from there, and now I can see, okay, the delete item is coming from the use items, and the use items is coming from this file. So we already wrote our first composables. If you are looking for a bit more inspiration, check out this Vue use Git repository where you can find already a lot of in TypeScript pre-written composables that you can use, Axios functions, and so on and so forth. I think it's also already Hacktoberfest time, so also if you want to get engaged in open source, this could be a start point for you. Okay, but now let's focus on state management. So how did I thought state was working? Then I started with Vue 2 in 2017 or something like that. First, I did the anti-pattern of props drilling. So I used props emit event handling to get something from a root component to its really like grandchildren to just emit everything up again. This was not really maintainable. Then I thought I'm smart and I used the global root, the $root, to attach variables to this global root thing until I realized this is not working, this is not really reactive, I think I should really not use this. It was also not really discussed. It was just really hidden in the API documentation that there is something like a global root. And then I sat down and thought, okay, state management sounds important, sounds difficult. Store sounds difficult, observables, Vuex, I'm not sure, but I will install Vuex now, and I was really just mind blown how simple this made it for me to create state management by only creating this index.js file. And already I had some state. It was a really powerful tool because it was so simple to use to then focus on the complex parts of writing code or finding solutions for bigger problems. But when I was starting with Vue 3, I thought, hey, give me a second. I think I can achieve state management actually with Composable. And it was really like, it was not because Vuex wasn't ready for Vue 3 yet. They were pretty quick and there was a migration guide, but I was interested in what is everything I can actually achieve with Composables. I want to get a step further here. And here I have another code sandbox, which will probably load soon, but I think I also have it preloaded here. Yes, I do. So here I want to focus first on the card items, which we see here. And now I have a bit more of a realistic example. So if I reload this, you can see that there will actually be like 3 seconds of a loading time, because usually I fetch the items from a server. So I have 3 seconds of loading and then I see the items. And here I have a first item, so what I have to buy next are the X, and then I have my list of items, and here I really use now a state with if loading, where I can set a loading state if it's still loading. And in the script part, I additionally use now the onMounted hook, where I can fetch the data. So going to the setup function, we can now see the state with the items and there is loading. And then I have the important function here are the load items, where I set the is loading to true. Since I don't actually have a real endpoint that I can talk to, I use a useSleep function for 3 seconds, and that I set some dummy items, my eggs and my milk. And if everything works out, I can set is loading to false again. I also have my method to delete the item, and I have a computed property for the first item, and I use the unmounted lifecycle hook to load the items as soon as my component has mounted. Okay, so far so good. We have something looking like a state, but it doesn't really feel like state management right away. So now I want to go to the app root component and switch to a different alternative of this application and use now 2 different components which are both providing us our items. So if I save this and reload, in the meanwhile I will go to the card items alternative, which is looking pretty similar to the favorites. So they are both just showing our items. So on the card items alternative, I scroll down, and instead of the whole logic we saw beforehand, I can now see that I import the use items composable, and I get all of the necessary data from the state, load items, first item, delete item, and on mounted I call the load items function. And now I can see here my 3 seconds loading, and I can see 2 times my list for my items. And here I want you to focus on the local state management. If I open the file, which I thought I had opened before, but I do it again for these composable, I can now see that the state here is outside of the component of this export function. And the rest of the implementation is the same one as before. It's just copied over with one important difference. So here I import additionally the read only keyword by Vue to have this store-like of feeling of this composable, to have the single source of truth, what we expect how a store should behave like. And now I want to put the state inside of this exported function. And if I'm doing this and wait for it to reload here, come on. They are loading for 3 seconds, and I have my X, which I can delete in those local state. And here below, I can delete the fresh milk on those local state management, as both the card items alternative and the favorites are both using these use items which have the state initialized inside of this function. But if you think, hey, this is kind of weird, this is not what I expect from state management, I expect it to be global, this is achieved by just moving the state on top of the export. And I will reload this again. And then you can see that therefore I just created the state now once. It's no global. It doesn't change. We don't initialize it a couple of times. We just export this functions a couple of times. So after I installed all of those dependencies, you will see that I can now delete the X and they will be deleted twice. So they are loading, and ta-da! Global state management. And the next point, if you think, hey, this is not looking like I would expect like a store really to look like, you can also use an alternative to this alternative. You can use the provide inject pattern, which was already given to us at Vue 2. And this is this code sandbox where I start with the app.vue root component, and you can see here that I import a store and I import a hello world, and I register the component hello world and I provide the store. What is the store? Let's have a look at the store at the index.js file here. So in here I have computed ref and read only, where I have my state a first item, a computed property, which is looking like a getter. Then I have functions that looks like a setter, and just out of fun I called them set items in this uppercase syntax. And then I export default the state, which is read only, my getters and my setters. So this should feel more like the Vuex way, the store way of doing things. And if I check out my components, I can go to Hello World, where I actually don't have any knowledge of the store at all, but I register the child 1. And in the child 1, I import inject from Vue, scroll down here, and I inject the store, and I can use the store in this child component using provide inject pattern and delete my data and my items here because I finally bought them. And this is also a global state management. So if I would inject the store in some other component, it would still work. So that's everything about the state management in Vue 3 using Composables. Thank you very much. See you later.